What's up, everybody? I've got a really great guest today, Greg Clowminzer. Greg is a transformational business and life coach. He's got over 10,000 hours of real-time coaching experience. He coaches and consults CEOs, small business owners, and professionals. He helps clarify their vision, their strategies, develops their skills to succeed in business and life. I had an opportunity to have a conversation with Greg a couple weeks ago, and it was really cool. Greg took a very different approach than what I've been used to, and has really gotten me thinking a little differently. And man, it's cool. So I'm really excited to have Greg as a guest today. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks, Dan. I really enjoyed our original conversation as well, and I'm really grateful that our conversation, just a natural, organic conversation, impacted you. And I thought of you several times after our call as well. So it was really nice to connect with you and kind of do a pre-podcast check-in. So that was nice. Yeah.
Well, great. So why don't we, for the benefit of all the listeners, let's start with your story. Let's start with your background a little bit and how you evolved into what you're doing today.
Yeah, great. Well, my background, if we go back, far enough, it seems like it's a past life or two, but it's been a while now. Given I've been coaching for close to 26 years, so when I go back to what I did before this, I was in commercial investment real estate, and I was relatively successful at a young age, Dan, and I specialized in multifamily or investment properties. So I was part of I ended up being the vice president and partner of a boutique multifamily apartment investing company. And I did well at it. And like a lot of professionals, I was kind of stressed out. I was really stressed out by being in the business as a professional. I was young. I was making really good money, and but I didn't understand stress, and I didn't understand happiness back in those days. And if we rewind the clock, and knowing what I know now, I would have been much better suited to understand where that comes from, stress comes from, and how to maintain a career, without the stressors, and then even some of the, myself and some of the people I see in the industry, the ways that they compensate for stress, which aren't always the greatest strategies, in terms of well-being. So that's where I really cut my teeth early on professionally. I did well. By the time I was 30, I'd already developed my first apartment complex, and stuff like that. I was very active in the community. I was the treasurer of CCIM, which is a local group of commercial investment real estate people. I was a treasurer for that organization for many years. I was on the I was on the San Diego Association of Realtors board of directors. I was also at the state level. I was at the CAR. I was a board of directors of CAR as well. And so I was this up and coming superstar kind of, and my stress started to get the best of me, and which was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because it got me to really
rethink your career,
really relook at life, and relook at the human experience, and relook at, well, what makes people so stressed out, and more importantly for me is like, where's the happiness in all this? That's kind of the biggest thing, because I was
how old were you at that time?
I was pre-30s, so it was like I made this really big run from 26 to about 31.
Okay.
30.
All right.
And I was just really stressed out, and I had a direct experience of something we've all heard, and that is money won't buy you happiness.
Okay.
Because I had the money and I was scratching my head going, well, how come this doesn't make any sense? So at a very young age, I had uh, 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 a good career, by all means, a good career. I was relatively successful. I was respected in my community as as somebody who was contributing and giving back. But something was missing on the
Right.
inside, you could say. So that was one of the things that kind of set me off on this track, is not only to um, get out from underneath all my stress, but like most people, looking for uh, where's happiness in all this. So that's a
That's
little
what we
bit of
all thrive
background.
for, right?
Yeah. So that's a little bit of background. And then, so what happened is, through that process of, um, having this inner awakening or calling or restlessness, or going, this doesn't seem to make so much sense to me. It got me moving in a direction of looking for help, and looking at resources. And much like yourself, I know you're a voracious learner. You've studied with a lot of different people, but 26, 27, 30 years ago, that's when it all started for me. And so I started reaching out, looking for help, and studying and becoming a voracious learner. And through that process, I had a series of aha moments, awakenings, if you will. And then the penny dropped for me. And I said, it's time for me to reinvent myself. And it was a very challenging time for me, Dan, because I didn't have an exit strategy. I didn't have a plan. In fact, most of the people in my life, particularly the business, my partners, the people in the office, they were saying, "What are you even thinking
What are
about?
you
Look,
doing? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, where else can you make this kind of money? What else can And so the environment in itself was threatened by the thought of me going out and reinventing myself. They wanted me to stay, and I thought that was really interesting. And it took me 2 years to finally get the courage to resign. Okay. Now, back in those days, I was pretty handsome and had a full head of hair, and I was in my double breasted suit and my Italian shoes and my silk
Styling.
tie, and I handed over my letter of resignation to the president. Um, and as soon as that letter left my hand, I spontaneously went into tears. It was the craziest thing. And as I reflected, and what ultimately started to make sense, is I didn't realize how much my identity was wrapped up into uh, making money,
Stuff.
the titles, the
Yeah.
stuff, and all of that. And when I handed over that letter of resignation, I resigned from being a partner, a vested interest. I resigned from the title of vice president. I resigned from the identity of a commercial real estate guy, which in me was kind of a big shot. That was a big idea. And then suddenly, who am I? Well, I was I fell into this abyss of not knowing who I was in that moment. But it was that phoenix, going into the ashes, and going through this transformation of process. That was the beginning of all of that.
Well, I mean, I think that's so cool because, kind of one of my messages to people is that, we've got time, and I mean, this was so long ago, and it took you 2 years to, really make that decision. And then the whole scope of things. Now you look back, and it was just 2 years. You got a lot more time. You're impacting lots of lives, and I want to always encourage, young people, really anybody, that if you're not happy, if you're not passionate about what you're doing and how you're spending your time, to really reevaluate, and talk to somebody like you who could potentially guide them to a direction that fulfills them, as opposed to just throws them into something that we're kind of we grow into as children, about becoming something, more money, more things, bigger house, nicer car, more vacations. where as we get around to that age of 30, I think that's when we realize that that there's way more to, what fulfills us than just that stuff. I mean, some people it happens, more at 40. So I think you were maybe a little young, but man,
Mhm.
that's great. So how did you go from that point to deciding I want to impact people's lives now? I want to help them change.
Yeah. Well, it was funny. I had you know I had this idea that I was going to be a seminar leader and do workshops. So I started to work on a workshop, and it was a one-day workshop back in 1993 called Passion for a Change, and it was to really get people to relook at their lives, career and life renewal type of thing, and really take an honest look at are you happy and what makes people happy, and their relationship with change and all of that. And so I developed the content for that. I delivered it. I enrolled people. I delivered it. It was a one-man band. And it was so powerful. People were having real breakthroughs, Dan. They were ready to quit their jobs. They were ready to leave their wives. They were just ready to, they were ready to live a life of no regrets. They didn't know where they were going, but they were going to go somewhere.
Something different. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, holy smokes, this is really powerful stuff. But it wasn't very profitable doing a one-day workshop, type of thing. And I was really innocent at the time. But what I started to notice is people they really saw something in this one day, and they really saw a new possibility
Wow.
for themselves. And so that's how coaching was born in that moment, watching people have this kind of moment of truth, if you will, for themselves. And I almost felt a sense of obligation or responsibility to help them move from where they were to what they saw was possible. And that's how coaching was born. And this is in its infancy. This is before coaching was even on the map, so to speak. So I started to, as part of the workshop, have a debrief, a 1-hour debrief with me the week after the workshop. And so I'd have everybody come in and sit down and share with me what they liked, what they got out of it, what they see possible for themselves. And they were very, very eager, and I really loved their enthusiasm. And when I asked them how they planned on making that transition from where they are to what they saw possible and their enthusiasm, they were like a deer in the headlights. They had no idea, and they hadn't.
How long does it take somebody to get to that point?
They hadn't even considered that. And so that's what I asked. I said, "Well, would you like some help with that?" That's how coaching got born, right in that moment, is helping them.
Wow.
Create that strategy. Wow. Yeah.
Very, very cool. So you've coached tons of people now. Mm-hmm. Is there a common denominator? Is there, what are you finding the area of concern for you or for them? Their number one problem, I guess, is a better way to say it, that you help people.
Yeah. Well, I think they fall into two camps. One is that they're really ambitious and they can't figure out why the results aren't lining up with their ambition. So they're confused and maybe even disappointed in why they're not achieving the results and performing at the level they are. So that's the first type. The second type is kind of like what I was talking about myself earlier, is that they're very accomplished. They have successful businesses. They're making really good money. They have good standings in the community. They may even have a lovely partner that they're spending life with. They've got maybe one or two beautiful children, if you will. They've got the boats and the cars and the house, and they're in really bad shape.
Yeah, it's sad.
They're in really bad shape because they're like going, is this as good as it gets? They're all, why isn't my life more awesome, given the fact that I've reached this
I've got everything I've dreamed of.
Level. Yeah. So that's kind of what I would call the psychological profile of a lot of the people I work with.
Are they, Greg, are they of a typical age?
Yeah, between 35 and 55.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And, these days, I've been coaching for a long time. In the beginning, I coached mostly women. I'd say 70, 80% of my clients are women. I think women are early adapters, and women are more apt to reach out and work with coaches and stuff like that. So that, in hindsight, that makes a lot of sense. Even if we look at the research, women purchase about 70% of the self-help books out there.
Do they?
Yeah. So, at least that was a number back in the day. And even men's book, like men's issues and what it means to be a man and understanding what, all that. 70% of those books are purchased by women because they want to understand men. So
I think I buy the other 30%.
Yeah. Me too. So, these days, though, as coaching has become more mainstream, and as guys are looking at now, here's an interesting thing to know, Dan, is that guys will hire a business coach often before a life coach. It's a really interesting phenomena, and the guys I work with, they're almost proud of having a business coach. There's something about their egos about having a life coach, but so a lot of guys, they feel really comfortable reaching out for a business coach. Now, I have a standing joke, Dan, that after about 3 business coaching sessions, it's all life coaching or personal coaching, because ends up being a lot of what the conversation's about, like what's going on and what's in the way type of thing. But
I think we, I'll speak, from my perspective as a guy. I had, all these goals as a young man in my late teens and 20s to get through college and play baseball and make money and have a family and get a house and get a vacation home and do all that. And then once I achieved that, and that journey was enjoyable and fulfilling, but then I got to a point where there wasn't anything else, and I found that I needed to reevaluate and then establish some new goals. I think those goals went away. That vision of what I wanted, I achieved, and now it was time to establish a new vision because I was kind of in what I started off to achieve. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. I'm curious, how did what did the goals look like at that point? Like, how did they change? I'm curious.
Well, I just I had the home of my dreams. I had a great marriage and active kids and money in the bank, and I was just kind of existing and fairly happy, but not completely fulfilled. And when I started looking at the pieces, for me, it was because I didn't have anything out there to strive for, being more time with the family. I really started appreciating the moments more than, it was the moments more. So in the early days when I was at work, I was thinking about being at home. When I was at home, I was thinking about being at work. And at about 40, I started really reevaluating, and my focus from about 40 to 48 was just being present. And that helped a lot. And then in that process, I told you, and a lot of the listeners know, that I lost my wife at the age of 48, and that threw me into a new purpose of finding out where my journey's headed. So I spent several years getting my arms around the boys and not really having any specific big goals. And once my boys landed on their feet and I fell in love again, I started to see a future that really excited me. And, I'm now doing exactly what I want to be doing. And it's not about the things or the money or anything like that anymore. Yeah. And I think that just that alone removes the stress of, because if you're focused on more, there's never enough. I mean, if it's money you want and you get a lot of money and you want a lot of money, you can go on forever with that game, and that does nothing about making you present and in the moment.
Yeah, yeah. No, I really love what you're saying, and the way I see it is what you're referring to is very predictable for the human journey, if you will. It's very predictable. It's repeated over and over with people. It's repeated over and over with human beings. Is that you go about life in a certain way, and I'm going to call it on the horizontal. There's this linear path, and we make progress on that path, that linear path, that horizontal path. But at some point, we figure out that there's not a whole lot of juice there.
Right.
And then at some point, people see that there's something other than linear or horizontal. And there's something about this vertical ascent. And that's what I'm really interested in. I didn't say it in this way when you and I talked the other day, but it's this vertical ascent that, for lack of a better word, becomes almost spiritual. Becomes a spiritual journey, if you will. So here's the deal, Dan. In the beginning, particularly in coaching, most people come in on a linear. They come into the path on a linear doorway, if you will, or they come through that door called more results, better performance, get my goals, get my shiny objects, get my stuff, and you get them there, but then they're like, well, now what? Now what? Okay, so that's the typical historical, journey with 1,000 faces type of motif, if you will, and so it's very predictable. We're very predictable, and there's no happiness there. It's very, very empty. And if people aren't careful, they get themselves in the weeds, they burn out, they're stressed out, and then they start behaving in really strange ways to compensate for the dissatisfaction of life. Okay?
So we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, the weeds. So say more about the weeds, because it was that conversation that had an impact on me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what did you hear in the weeds?
Well, for me, what registered with me was just getting stuck in the day-to-day stuff, the habits or lack of disciplines to get me to where I want to go or happy. I get stuck in the weeds, not growing, or growing in the wrong direction.
Yeah. That's really perfect, and that's very parallel to what we're talking about. This horizontal path is that it can only get you so far, and one of the things that I had expressed to you is I love the topic of your podcast, playing the long game, right? And if we're going to play the long game, we better be damn sure we're enjoying the journey.
No question.
And so the long game is learning to enjoy the journey, but it's also comes with upgrading the system and understanding where stress comes from, where anxiety comes from, where insecurity comes from, where uh, discouragement comes from.
And that's the operating system that you referred to?
Yeah. That's the operating system. So, like I had a guy come in and meet with me yesterday, and he's a young guy. He's 35. He's married. He has a very, very successful recruiting business, and he does really well. And you'd say, well, why is he coming to see me? You know, he's got everything going for him and all that. And what he alluded to, and what most people kind of get onto, is that he's in his own way. He's in his own way. And I think that all of us can really relate to that in some ways. Like the only thing interfering between what any of us kind of desire to create or accomplish or whatever, really the only thing that's in the way is us. Okay? Now, people innocently don't know that, or innocently know it and resist the heck out of it or fight it. But in any case, whether people know it or don't know it, it's true. The fact that we're all our greatest enemies, that we all are getting in our own way. Now, what this guy said yesterday is, I overthink things. That's what's getting in my way. It's I'm putting on weight. I'm stressing out. I'm drinking more than I should. I'm not present with my wife. So these are all of the implications of being in our own way, and a lot of times that equates to having too much thought on the system or extraneous thoughts. Okay, so I was talking with him, and I asked him a question. I often ask this question to people, Dan. I said, so how do you make sense of any field or any performer, any athlete, anybody who's at the top of their game? How do you explain high levels of performance? Okay. Now, anybody listening here should also kind of check in with that. Well, how do you explain high performance in human beings? And, what's really interesting is he said, well, experience, and the more you do something, and, everybody's got their answers to how they think people perform really, really well. And then after he shared everything that he shared, I said, well, would you like to know what the research says in terms of high performance? He says, yeah, I'd really like to know that. I said, well, in any case, in any situations, what the research has discovered is that the less thinking people have on the system, the higher they're able to perform. Like you don't get a big wave surfer going and dropping in on a 30-foot wave that has a lot of thinking going on. Mm-hmm. Their mind is clear.
Just doing as opposed to thinking.
Say again?
Just doing as opposed to thinking. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, not really. Not really. Okay. See, that makes sense, and it looks like they're just doing, but what happens is, and this goes back to the operating system. So here's the deal. Most of us have no idea that we're living in a world of thought. They have no idea. In fact, if you're listening, you're probably going, who is this crazy guy? What is he talking about, living in a world of thought? Okay? Here's the deal. Human beings live in a world of thought like fish live in water. It's invisible to them, yet it is the most important the most overlooked and the most misunderstood aspect of high performance and staying in the long game and staying
Wow.
out of the weeds. It's completely the missing link to all coaching programs out there, to all of the helping professions. It's the missing link.
Yeah, I've never heard it. I mean,
Yeah,
this intrigues the heck out of me. That's for
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so Greg, what in talking to these people, what, or not even in talking with people in your world, in your life, what excites you most?
What excites me most?
What gets you out of bed in the morning, fired up?
Oh gosh, the conversation that we're in right now and helping people get out from underneath their extraneous thought and having access to their innate well-being and their innate wisdom, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. And uh, this gentleman that came over to that I was talking about yesterday, he left and he was touched and moved. Now, whether he becomes a client or not is here nor there. That's what I live for. I
Hmm.
live for when you and I met and talked the other day, and you said, "Wow, that really was new for me."
Mm-hmm.
That's what I live for, brother. Is to share the little I know with other people, you know. And here's the deal: like it's really weird, and it comes from just a desire to help people. Is that I know a little something that people don't know.
I think it's a big something, actually.
It's not like I'm a better person or I'm smart or whatever. It's just like I know a little something.
Hmm.
And if people knew what I knew, it would be a game changer for them in the
Wow.
area of performance, in the area of well-being, in the area of relationships, across the board. And this is what I found, this little bit that I know that I share with people, okay, is that all boats rise with the tide. So an example, I went into one of my clients who has a boutique mortgage company here in San Diego. And I went in and I spent 3 days with him and his team, teaching him the little bit that I know, about the human experience. And that's all we focused on, is helping people understand the human experience and where their experience comes from. Okay, helping them with that. And then all boats rise with the tide. I follow up with them a couple weeks later, and they said, "Oh, we're communicating much better. We're getting along. We're all on the same page. It's like when one of us gets down, we're snapping out of it much quicker. The resilient level of the LOs is going up. It's like we're in the game. We're out of the weeds more and more." Okay, so that's what this little bit of understanding can do for people. All boats rise with the tide. Now, one of the really interesting things in debriefing with these people a couple weeks after a training with them was they would share things like, "I'm getting along with my wife so much better. I'm getting
Wow.
along with my boyfriend so much better." Well, I didn't do any couples counseling or any of that stuff, but it's this little bit of knowledge, this little bit of insight. When people see it for themselves, it's a game changer. Okay, it's a complete and utter game changer. It keeps people in the long game, okay, and out of the weeds and out of getting burned out. Okay, now one of the reasons for that is that the reasons people get in the weeds and stay in the weeds is that they have a innocent misunderstanding of where their experience comes from. And they end up in the weeds and they try to figure themselves out. And the more they try to figure out how to get out of the weeds, the more discouraged they become, and the deeper they get in them. All right. And how they do that innocently is they just take everything personal.
Hmm.
They overly self-evaluate. They do psychoanalysis on themselves. They do self-assessment, which digs them deeper into the sandpit, deeper into the weeds. All right. That's the biggest innocent misunderstanding, is people think that if I've got a problem, I should be able to think my way out of it. And it couldn't be further from the truth and more problematic for the person.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So what I do is I teach people to stop analyzing the crap out of themselves in life and to reflect on the bigger picture, to reflect on the long game, as you would term it, and to get them out of the weeds by getting them to reflect on the bigger picture. Okay.
Love it.
Now, one of the ways to do that, for example, if a professional is discouraged, is to help them understand that that's not personal. It's like all human beings get discouraged from time to time. Why should you be exempt? Now that really might sound confrontational, but that really helps people when they go, oh shit, you mean I'm normal? You mean other people get discouraged too? Like I'm not the only one? And so they start to loosen up, they start to relax, and they start to find their way out of the weeds. I can't tell you how helpful that is to people.
That's got to be so fulfilling for you too. I could see how passionate you are about that. So is there anything that worries you, that keeps you up at night?
Oh, geez, no. In the past, yes, but this understanding that I'm sharing with you, Dan, it has literally saved my life in terms of vaporizing stress and worry from my system.
So cool to hear.
Now it doesn't mean I don't have worrisome thoughts from time to time, but the thoughts are kind of like they come in and they don't really affect me. And so what I mean by that is the nature of the work I do is I help professionals and business owners improve their psychological fitness. Or another way to say that is I help with this understanding, this little bit of what I know, human beings' psychological immune system is boosted. And as a result, insecure thoughts like worry, or does somebody like me, or am I doing it right? You still have those thoughts, but when a person's psychological immune system is higher, they're not affected by those thoughts. Okay, so that's been my experience, is that through this understanding, my psychological immune system gets stronger and stronger. I become more psychologically fit. And as a result, I still have the same crazy thinking other people have, but it just doesn't affect me.
Kind of blows through.
Yeah. And that's what keeps people in the weeds. It's like, if people really understood this, that the reason they're in the weeds is really innocent, and it's only because their psychological immune system is weak.
I get it.
That's it.
I get it. Yeah, that's cool. I love it, man. So, Greg, how do people get a hold of you? Because I know I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot of interest in what you can do for them.
Well, I have a modest website at gregclowminzer.com. And then I also I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, I'm on most of the social medias. So if anybody just Googled my name, they'd be hard pressed not to find me. And then I would encourage them just to connect with me via social media or any of that. And yeah, that's probably the easiest way.
Great, Greg. This conversation, like last time for me, was great. Your insight excites me, and I look forward to many more conversations with you. And thank you very much for taking the time out of your day today to join us on my podcast.
Oh, it was my pleasure, Dan. I really enjoyed being with you here today. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Have a good day.
Okay.